Hey everyone, Sean here, wishing you a happy Wednestopia. I owe you guys some comic book reviews. I'm going to go ahead and review my books for the 9th, which I didn't unfortunately get to last week, and then I'll show you the books I picked up this week for the 16th, which you can expect a review for sometime during the week. Alright, so I'm not going to review everything I picked up last week since it's kind of outdated information, but I'll show you what I picked up, and then I'll kind of review my top 3 for you. So first up, I did pick up Justice League 3000, which is a book that I always look forward to, although I know it isn't as popular of a book at this point. It was one of those, I think a lot of people weren't really into its zaniness, and its style of storytelling feels very 90s Justice League, very Grant Morrison in the sense that there's just kind of a lot going on. It's just kind of like a lot of dialogue, a lot of explanation, but also kind of a quirky quality to it. And I don't think that's as appealing now as it was at the time. I've actually been really enjoying it, and I really do enjoy the humor in it as well. Even though it is starting to feel, admittedly, a little bit one-note, I hope that after this story arc wraps up that they can kind of find, I don't want to say a new direction for the book, but just something to just kind of change it up and give it a little bit of a different feel. The other thing about this book that I heard someone say recently, I think it was Comic Book Cast, they were talking about it and they were complaining about, like, well, if the superheroes can just die, then where are the stakes? Because they can just be brought back, which of course happened with The Flash. Now we're getting Firestorm in this issue. I think that's just silly. I mean, that happens all the time in comic books. And the fact that, I mean, they can literally die and be back in the next issue, I think is a great satire on just sort of the state of death in comic books right now. So if you're not picking this up and you're curious, I do recommend checking it out, but admittedly it is becoming a little bit one note. Alright, next up for last week, I picked up Kick-Ass number 3, or excuse me, Kick-Ass 3 number 7, which is the penultimate issue in the big Kick-Ass saga. I've been enjoying this. It hasn't been blowing me away. I think some of the uniqueness that was Kick-Ass back when it first started has kind of worn off to some degree, and this is just kind of coasting now. I'm ready for it to be done. I hope that they have a good conclusion. I hope they don't just kind of kill him off. I think that would be pretty lazy, but we'll see what happens. Hoping for the best with issue number 8, but we'll see what happens when that arrives. And on a side note with that, like, Mark Millar has been like this, I feel like. I mean, he was really popular in like 2006 when, Civil War was happening. It was kind of at like the top of his game, I think, for people, or at least his top of his popularity. I don't know if necessarily I should say the top of his game, because I don't think his writing has really changed that much. But people were really into what he was doing at that point. And then, he's kind of, I think, lost some popularity. He's a little bit more niche, I guess, than he used to be. And I definitely think, just at least within our community, there's a fair amount of animosity towards him. But I have to say that, like, I think I'm going to be picking up MPH because, which is his new thing coming from Image, just on the basis of how strong Starlight has been. And I've actually been more excited about the Millerverse than I've ever been. And it's been going for kind of a while now. But between Kick-Ass wrapping up, Starlight being really good, I'm really curious to see where MPH is going to go. And I think that he's been kind of growing a little bit from where he's been in the last few years. So that feels good. It's not just a bunch of it doesn't feel as much like it's just a bunch of like gratuitous gore and swearing and all those things that are just kind of there for shock value. I feel like there's been something a little bit more to it lately. Anyway, next up, I picked up Great Pacific 14, which is a book that I should review for you guys in the next couple of issues since I'm not really reviewing it today. This is a book that I found like issues 1 through 12 for like $1 a piece at Half Price Books. Picked up the whole run and decided immediately to hop right on. And I remember when this first started, there was a fair amount of interest in it. It was kind of a big book, I feel like, at least among the community. Like, I know several people who are picking it up, and no one seems to talk about it anymore. I'm curious as to why that is, because I actually really am enjoying this. I think that this particular issue is a little bit weaker, although it has some interesting implications for what's to come in the next issues. But like overall, like the first arc I thought was really interesting. The second arc took a little while for me to get into because it kind of jumped forward in time, and it felt like there was a lot of unanswered stuff from the first couple issues that it just kind of shifted gears and kind of left those things behind. But since then, it's been pretty steady. And after a couple, sort of the first shock of issues like 7 and 8, I've really been digging this. I think it's a fantastic read. I'd love to know kind of what happened to it, if people are reading it in trade or if they're not reading it. I know it's been late. I know this book in particular, this issue, is a few weeks late, so maybe that's part of why it is. But this is a good book, and I hope that if you guys have given it a break, check it out again, because I think it's worth its $2.99 price tag from Image. Fantastic read. All right. Also, I picked up FBP, which is Federal Bureau of Physics, aka Collider, aka a book that's been slow starting, and with last issue felt like it was really starting to fire on all cylinders. I have to say, this is a book that if I was doing all of the reviews, I don't know if I could review this book today, just because I don't even know what's going on yet. The last issue, I guess I had some confusion about the ending, so I had to kind of go back and reread that as I was going into this. And at the end of the issue, I felt like answers are coming with the third part of this story arc, the Wish You Were Here story arc. But as it stands right now, I'm completely lost. And I'm enjoying it, but I don't quite know what's going on. I'm curious to see what's going to happen. But all in all, it's a fun read. I think the writing is really tightened up on this, and I think the art is really starting to fill its shoes. I don't know if it just took me this long to warm up to it, or if there's just a little bit of difference in just kind of the detail of it maybe, but I am really liking this art a lot more, and I have to go back and look at those issues again to see what it is. It might be the coloring that's changed, or it may, as I'm thinking about it right now, it could actually be the paper. It's using like a glossy paper now, as opposed to the typical Vertigo, that sort of newspaper paper, just sort of that pulp paper. And I think that maybe that's bringing out a little bit more vibrancy, and especially the coloring on this artwork, than the old style paper did. Maybe that's what it is. I don't know. Either way, I'll have to go back and take a look. Maybe next issue around, I'll have a little bit better explanation as to why I like the art better. But I definitely do. It's definitely firing on all cylinders now. If you weren't picking it up before, you kind of have to go through those first few issues to really understand kind of what's going on with the world. But after that, I think it's worth a read. So check it out. All right, on to the top 3 books of last week. Again, apologies, I didn't quite get to review these for you. I was very busy last week, so I just didn't get the chance. But let me give you sort of the books that got me most excited last week, and let me tell you my thoughts on them. First up, Batman Eternal, probably not really a surprise. When they first announced this title, I had a lot of animosity towards it. I knew I'd be picking it up because it's Batman. It's a weekly book. It's Scott Snyder, James Tynion IV, Ray Fawkes, and John Layman, and Tim Seeley. So, like, a lot of good talent on there. Oh, my. Especially, sorry, I almost bent my cover there. Especially, like, I'm excited to see Tim Seeley on Batman. I think that he is a really good choice for this character. But, when they first announced it, it was just like $12 a month more on Batman that I wasn't planning on spending. Then issue 28 of Batman came out, and we got our preview into what's to come with Batman Eternal, and I got really jazzed. I'm really, really excited to see what's going to happen, and this issue did not disappoint. I really love the art from Jason Fabok. We kick things off hardcore here with sort of the end of the story, and basically Bruce Wayne / Batman chained to the bat signal, Gotham City on fire, things couldn't possibly be any worse, and then, boom, we cut back to this character who sort of is a lot like a young Jim Gordon, in a sense. I definitely feel like they're kind of going for, like, a more sort of mainstream comic look at sort of when Jim Gordon comes to Gotham in year 1. This is kind of this new person coming to Gotham in sort of a similar circumstance, and him kind of idolizing Jim Gordon. And then we kind of get right into the action after that. We've got basically Batman versus Professor Pig. James Gordon is in jeopardy. We get a return, which was a very guilty pleasure for me, I have to admit, but I did like seeing the nonsensical Iron Man Batman costume, which first appeared in the Court of Owls arc, which was silly there, but it was kind of a one-off. It felt really badass. Now it's kind of been cheapened by the fact that it's in this as well, but I gotta admit, I enjoyed it. Guilty pleasure moment, but I definitely liked it. And then we kind of get into some troubling stuff with Jim Gordon. Since it's been out a week, I can go ahead and spoil it. I mean, the big double-page spread we've been seeing in, what is it, the News 52 or whatever they call that thing at the back. They've been showing this double-page spread. Actually, it's funny. It's right here. Channel 52. Breaking news. So basically, it's revealed that James Gordon is inadvertently responsible for this catastrophe. And, big consequences for Jim Gordon on what's to come after that. Pretty curious to see what's going to happen next. I have to say, this felt like a strong first issue. The only thing that worries me with this is the thing that's worried me historically with a lot of their weekly titles, which is that, with the exception of 52, which I really enjoyed, when you got into, like, Countdown and, what was that one, Brightest Day, you've got all these different characters that they're following. And what happens is they'll spend an issue on one of them, and then they'll never come back to that person until like 5 issues later, and you've completely lost interest in that story arc. In the meantime, you get a whole bunch of different other story arcs, and it just becomes a mess. It's impossible to keep track of. I'm hoping they don't do that with Batman Eternal. I hope they keep it focused with just the few kind of core characters in here, with some strong supporting characters kind of to branch out. But if they can stay focused, I think this has the potential to be a really, really great Batman story. So here's hoping. Either way, really enjoyed the first issue. If you didn't pick it up, go do it. It's definitely worth a read. My sort of second most exciting title I read this week was Manifest Destiny. This is issue number 6, and we are wrapping up the first story arc in Manifest Destiny. When I reviewed issue number 5, I did kind of say, like, we're getting to the end of the story arc, so there's not a lot of new stuff. It's a lot of just kind of concluding, wrapping things up, some big fights, some great art, but that's kind of about it. And I had some worries about, like, is this going to become just kind of villain of the month, or is it going to kind of grow into something a little bit bigger? With this issue, I really got the sense that they're building to some bigger things, which I'm really, really excited for. As always, the art does not disappoint. Just fantastic stuff here from Matthew Roberts, and really, really elevated by the art in this, more than almost any other book on stands right now. I'd say Black Science is also really held up by this, but just the fantastic coloring that gives it this this grotesque storybook feel or something. I don't quite know how to describe it, but I think it's really, really captivating. Really, really draws you into the issue. And then, as I said, we get some really interesting implications for things to come. So not only do we kind of wrap up this big story arc with these sort of human-infesting plants that sort of turns people into zombies, but our two main characters are swallowed up by this sort of giant Venus flytrap thing. And when they go into it, it sort of douses them with this chemical that puts them to sleep, basically to make them easier to digest. But then they start dreaming. They're in this bizarre sleep state. And I probably shouldn't show this on YouTube, although I really do want to. But basically, they both dream sort of two very opposite things. One of them dreams, I can't remember which one. We'll say Lewis. I honestly don't remember which one it was. But like Lewis dreams about he's in the middle of this massive orgy, and it's this like euphoric experience that he's having. And then I think, is it Lewis or Clark who's narrating? I can't remember now. Anyway, and he's like writing about this experience in his diary. And then Clark, on the other hand, or maybe vice versa, is dreaming that he is massacring Native Americans. And it's this horrific, horrific experience. And there's this really great juxtaposition, because the one narrating it is the one who's having this euphoric experience. He's talking about how great it is and how you can't even imagine what the other one is going through. And yet the other one is going through this terrible experience. There's a great sort of juxtaposition there in the writing and the illustrating. But then there's this sort of element where they kind of imply that this is a sign of things to come, and it's sort of a prelude to sort of maybe not even necessarily the next story arc, but something that's going to build over the course of the series, which was really, really interesting because it was very abstract and very unclear as to exactly how it was going to play in, but it did definitely kind of tickle my brain and get me thinking about what's coming next with Manifest Destiny. So a book I really, kind of a surprise hit for me because I'm not usually into kind of the sort of monster of the week kind of books, but especially when it's zombies. But this one really is very captivating, very interesting, and worth it alone just because of the art. Great, great book. Go pick it up. Comes out in trade next month, so you have no excuse. I'm sure it'll be $9.99 like all those sort of Image Volume 1s are. So what was pick of the week, you ask? Well, it's maybe going to be a controversial pick because I know this is a book that people are still kind of mad at because it has gone to twice a month and it's bumped up $1 per issue. However, Daredevil 1.50 was a fantastic read. I absolutely love this book. It was exactly what I would want from an anniversary issue. I hate books that are point anything, and this being 1.50, like, if you didn't know it was the 50th anniversary, which I didn't at first, I remember when I saw this listed as 1.50, I had to ask someone, like, what the is up with this? And then they explained it, and I was kind of like, all right. But nevertheless, inside this issue is some fantastic stuff. So I'm going to kind of go through each of the stories. There's only 3. The first one is The King in Red, which is our Mark Waid story. And basically it's what is life like, what is life like for Matt Murdock when he turns 50 years old? And it's not exactly what you would expect. And it had some really interesting implications for a couple of reasons. What you get is this great father-son story, which has some really interesting sort of ties to, or I should say parallels to Matt Murdock when he was a child and sort of seeing what his son is going through. There are some admittedly odd sort of powers moments, I guess we'll call them, around sort of how his powers kind of followed through to his son, which seems a little bit bizarre. And then there's this sort of weird seeing colors thing that was kind of bizarre. But I could forgive those things because it served to tell the story in a really, really interesting way that made you really feel for this sort of father-son dynamic they were playing towards. The icing on the cake, and the second thing that made this really interesting, was you have a lot of hints of what's to come, because a lot of stuff he talks about in here will be like, you know, I'm old, blah, 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 blah. And then I remember this thing that happened shortly after I got to San Francisco, implying that this is something we're going to see in the near future. And they have some really interesting implications here and got me really excited for some of the books that are to come. So very well done, Mark Waid, in sort of whetting my appetite, but still giving me a captivating story within just what is essentially kind of a lot of Easter eggs, I feel like, for what's to come. My favorite moment in this book, and I'm just going to kind of spoil this. It's been out for a week, so if you haven't picked it up yet, that's on you. We do get to see that Foggy is still alive, and he's lost quite a bit of weight, actually, which I really enjoyed. It felt very real to me in the sense that after he's gone through this, you know, huge ordeal with cancer and, you know, dealing with the repercussions of that, you know, I'm sure, like, throughout the course of that, he would have shed a lot of weight just through the healing process, I guess. And seeing him thin here, I think, kind of follows through with that in a way that people wouldn't necessarily expect. You know, it's not just like randomly skinny Foggy Nelson. It's the Foggy Nelson who's kind of a survivor at this point. And I thought that that was a nice little touch. Anyway, on to the next story, which is the last 2 stories are fairly short. The next one is by the great team of Brian Michael Bendis and Alex Maleev. Probably, I would say, overall, my favorite team that's been on Daredevil. Although I have to kind of asterisk that with, you know, Mark Waid hasn't had sort of a one-on-one team. He's been very much like him and then like 2 or 3 different artists kind of carrying the book. Whereas Brian Michael Bendis and Alex Maleev, it was just those 2 guys for a long time. Obviously, there was occasional filler artists, but for the most part, it was just them. And it was really cool seeing them back again. And despite the fact, and this may put you off at first when I show this, despite the fact that it's basically a prose story with illustrations, it actually felt a lot like those classic Bendis Malieve comic books. Now, normally I would not enjoy a story that's set up like this. I'm not a big fan of a comic book that's just prose with some illustrations. However, what Brian Michael Bendis and Alex Malieve do here is really compelling because the story you get is informed by the pictures. Like, the person who's narrating this will kind of say one thing, but then they will but then when you look at the pictures, it's implicating something else, or it's informing the story in a way that the actual writing doesn't, at the very least. So it made it actually a very interesting read. My one complaint with this story is, I'm trying to remember the name of his wife. Was it Mia that he was married to with Brian Michael Bendis? I think he married, her name was Mia. I can't remember for sure. But anyway, you had that whole big long story arc where he married Mia, and this story in here by Brian Michael Bendis kind of felt like a repeat of that. Since Brubaker took that story in kind of a different direction when he took over the book, it's almost kind of like Brian Michael Bendis created a surrogate character for Mia and then told his own version of the story and how it would have played out. And admittedly, it feels a little bit derivative because you already have a character like that, and it ends in a sort of typically downer Daredevil fashion. That said, he found a good way to make it very compelling. It's just very weird that, you know, he has basically a whole another second wife that we won't know about probably in any other circumstance than beyond Daredevil 1.50. All right, and then the final story in this, which I got a huge kick out of, it was just a lot of fun to read, was nothing less than a Mike Murdock story, which I thought was just fantastic. I really enjoyed the artwork in here by Carl Kessel, who is someone that I used to read these like Star Wars sort of illustrated sort of kids novels, and he did the art in those, and I always really liked it. But then when I got into comic books later in life, whenever I saw his art in comics, it never really did it for me for whatever reason, and maybe it was just an expectations thing. But I felt that sort of childhood enjoyment that I had from those Star Wars books in these Daredevil pages, which was really, really satisfying. And then the best part is you've got nothing less than this Mike Murdock story. Now, for anyone who doesn't know who Mike Murdock is, basically Daredevil created, or I should say Matt Murdock, basically started telling everyone that he had a twin brother, Mike Murdock, and basically Mike Murdock is Daredevil. And that's how there was sort of this excuse for the idea that, you know, if people would think Matt Murdock was Daredevil, well, actually, no, it's Mike Murdock. It was that silly. And of course, you know, the only thing distinguishing Mike Murdock from Matt Murdock is the fact that he wears these stupid glasses. The whole story is very tongue-in-cheek. It's cool because we get it kind of told from a, it's like an old recording that they find in the Baxter building that Mike Murdock had recorded way back in the day, and then Foggy Nelson finds it. But now he knows the truth. He knows that Matt Murdock is Daredevil, and so it's kind of this embarrassing moment for Matt Murdock where he has to kind of own up to his sort of scheming ways of the past. And at the same time, we get this really silly story from a long-lost Silver Age Daredevil character. I'm pretty sure he was from, like Daredevil 15 or something like that, like in the teens. Pretty much for sure. So anyway, that story is called The Last Will and Testament of Mike Murdock, and it was a cool way to round this issue out because you get the full gamut. You get the Mark Waid, you get the dark Bendis, and then you get sort of the classic sort of Silver Age Daredevil. I do think that Mark Waid has done a good job of melding those two things with his series, and it's cool to see what he's done so expertly over the last volume, issues 1 through 36. It's cool to see that kind of summarized in this 50th anniversary issue over the course of 3 very different kinds of stories. So anyway, if you're not picking up Daredevil because of the whole price change and the hike and everything, 1.50 is an issue that you can just pick up on its own. It's kind of a neat one to have. It's got a cool cover with, of course, you know, references to all of the prior writers and artists who have worked on Daredevil. And it's definitely a fun read, so you should definitely check it out. And maybe the first story will interest you enough that you'll decide to hop on board with me, as I am pretty much the only person still getting this book now. All right, so that's what I picked up last week. I hope you enjoyed my reviews. Let me show you what I picked up this week so you can see what to expect in the days to come from my channel for reviews. I picked up Harley Quinn number 5, which is, I've been picking all these up, but not usually on the day, and I can't remember if I've reviewed number 4 or not. But this is a book I've been picking up. I'm excited to review this one. Of course, Batman Eternal number 2 came out, and I was really excited for this because Jason Fabok is back on art, which is really, really exciting. I was expecting kind of a whole nother artist and a whole nother feel, but we basically kind of get to pick up right where we left off, which I'm really excited for. Wonder Woman number 30. This story arc is wrapping up this year, folks, and it's been an amazing run. I cannot wait to read this. Always fantastic. On a whim, I picked up Sinestro number 1. We'll see how this goes. I wasn't originally planning on it, but I picked up Magneto number 1 a few days ago and really enjoyed that. This is Cullen Bunn on Sinestro, and I'm curious, so we'll see how it goes. I picked up Batman number 30, which gets Worst Cover of the Week award because I'm sick of seeing this cover yet again. This is the 3rd time I've seen this cover with basically just different, like, coloring or whatever. Obnoxious. Don't like it, but I am hopeful for the issue inside. And then the book that gets Cover of the Week as the best cover has to be The Auteur number 2. Really enjoyed this last month. Really excited for it this month. And how much cooler can you get than basically, you know, the Justice is Blind sort of figure, except it's Godzilla. I mean, that is just fantastic. As gross out cool as the cover was last month, this one gets it in spades as just an amazing, amazing cover. Really dig that one. Can't wait to read it. Okay, so that's what I've got for now. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Again, apologies for being a little late, and be sure to tune in again soon where I review this week's books. And in the meantime, like, subscribe, comment, yada, yada, yada. You know the drill. Talk to you later.